Today, we're exploring 7 budget-friendly meals that practically disappeared from modern tables. From hearty casseroles to thrifty soup recipes, these forgotten classics once fed countless households when every penny counted. Number 1. Cabbage and noodles. Once seen as a wallet-friendly comfort dish across various American households in the 1970s, cabbage and noodles offered an easy way to fill empty stomachs without breaking the bank. Baby boomers who grew up around that time remember their parents slicing cabbage into thin shreds, frying it with diced onions in a pan greased with either bacon drippings or a little oil, then mixing in cooked egg noodles. The result was a sweet, slightly earthy meal enhanced by the caramelization that happened when the cabbage lingered just long enough in the pan. Families discovered that a single head of cabbage went a long way, and that noodles, especially the wide egg variety, were readily available and inexpensive. While this dish had earlier roots in American communities with Eastern European or German heritage, it became widely adopted in the 1970s amid economic uncertainties tied to fuel shortages and inflation. People saw it as a low-cost fix that didn't rely on pricey meats. In old commercials and print advertisements, cabbage wasn't typically the centerpiece. More glamorous vegetables like carrots or peas got more airtime. But in neighborhoods across the Midwest, South, and beyond, word of mouth kept this dish a practical mainstay. Mothers, grandmothers, and even newly married baby boomers who remembered rationing stories from their parents treated cabbage and noodles almost like a cultural inheritance. Today, though, mention this meal to younger generations, and many will draw a blank. Modern restaurants might serve a trendy version, but it's not as common in standard family dinners. Part of its fade stems from changing palates. Younger people often prefer bolder flavors or more protein-heavy meals. Another factor is the cabbage smell that tends to linger. In smaller apartments or more airtight modern homes, some cooks shy away from a dish that announces itself so strongly. Although you can still find references to it in certain retro cookbooks, it rarely takes center stage in mainstream recipe blogs, overshadowed by new wave cuisines that highlight Asian or Latin American tastes. For baby boomers, though, a plate of steamy cabbage and noodles can instantly transport them back to the clanking of a 1970s kitchen, the hiss of a black and white television in the living room, and the sense that a decent hot meal could be pulled together from the simplest of ingredients. Number 2. Creamed ground beef on toast. Referred to by some older Americans as hamburger gravy, this dish dates back to the mid-20th century, but it enjoyed a surge of popularity in the 1970s when ground beef was still fairly cheap. The method involved browning ground beef, draining the excess fat, then stirring in flour, milk, salt, and pepper until it thickened into a creamy gravy. Poured over white bread toast, it had a heavy, filling quality that resonated with families juggling shrinking budgets. It was reminiscent of an earlier Army staple known as SOS, though that typically featured chipped or dried beef. Throughout the 1970s, baby boomers who were finishing high school or entering college might recall seeing this meal on the family table whenever the household needed a quick dinner solution. Advertisers for beef in old commercials usually focused on steak or roasts, but ground beef soared in popularity because it delivered decent protein for less money, especially useful for families with multiple children. Old cookbooks from the era often suggested adding peas or onions to the mix for extra flavor, though many stuck to the bare-bones approach of meat, gravy, and bread. Over 100 scanned articles from vintage lifestyle magazines show that people were not as concerned with calorie counts or fat content then, focusing instead on how to get full after a day's work or school. As the 1980s and 1990s unfolded, the rise of global cuisines and the push for lighter meals meant that creamed ground beef on toast started disappearing from most recipe collections. Younger cooks found it bland or too heavy, especially once the popularity of pasta, stir-fries, and tacos took hold. Some who've tried reviving it mention that it requires more seasoning or a different texture to appeal to modern palates. Baby boomers reflect on it with a mixture of nostalgia and mild embarrassment, acknowledging that while it's not gourmet, it was a lifesaver when paychecks ran thin. In certain corners of the internet, you'll see vintage dinner challenges where folks recreate old America staples, and this dish occasionally resurfaces, more as a nod to the past than a genuine addition to today's weekly meal plan. Number 3. Ham and bean soup. A long-standing comfort classic in American culinary traditions, ham and bean soup was especially prevalent in the 1970s as a budget-friendly one-pot meal. Most families use dried navy beans or pinto beans, soaked overnight to soften them, then simmered them with a leftover ham bone or inexpensive cuts of ham. Adding onions, carrots, celery, and any other leftover vegetables turned the soup into a hearty fix, especially comforting during colder months. Baby boomers often recount childhood memories of a big pot bubbling away on the stove for hours, filling the house with a savory aroma. Even though ham and bean soup traces back to the 1930s, its popularity carried through subsequent decades, including World War II rationing in the 1940s. By the 1970s, convenience items like canned beans or packaged bouillon cubes made the recipe simpler. You could toss everything in a slow cooker or large pot before heading out to work, returning in the evening to a filling dinner. Regional variations abounded. Some families added tomatoes, while others favored thickening the soup with mashed beans. In old commercials, soup companies often promoted condensed or ready-made versions, but many people still preferred the homemade approach because it was cheaper. Grocery stores throughout the 1970s stocked plenty of dried beans, marketing them as an ideal budget-stretching option for large families. Despite its widespread popularity, the dish eventually lost ground in the 1980s and 1990s when faster meal options gained popularity, including microwavable dinners and a broader selection of canned soups. Modern tastes also shifted toward more global flavors, and ham and bean soup felt old-fashioned, lacking the spice or complexity that younger families were discovering in new cuisines. Nostalgic baby boomers who do whip up a pot today often say it reminds them of a slower era, one where neighbors dropped by unannounced and families routinely ate dinner together around a modest kitchen table. The soup lives on in certain soul food or country cooking circles, but it has indeed evaporated from the day-to-day menus of many American families, overshadowed by the wealth of culinary choices that define contemporary dinner planning. Number 4, liver and onions. A dish that can spark strong reactions, liver and onions was a staple on many 1970s dinner tables, especially those adhering to the frugal, waste not mindset carried over from earlier decades. High in iron, beef liver was touted as a nutritious bargain, though its metallic aftertaste challenged plenty of palates. Parents would dredge slices of liver in flour, fry them in a pan, then caramelize onions in the leftover grease. Nutritional guidelines of the time often praised organ meats for their vitamin content, and advertisements occasionally hinted at their supposed benefits. Baby boomers recall how these dinners could be polarizing. Some loved the pungent taste, while others found it tough to swallow. In many households, kids were encouraged, sometimes forced, to consume it in the name of health. Old medical articles from that era, now archived online, show that doctors frequently recommended liver for those with anemia or general fatigue. Moreover, if the family butcher offered discounted cuts, liver was often at the top of the list. Frying it with onions helped mask some of the stronger flavors, and adding bacon drippings or gravy gave the dish more depth. The lingering smell could fill the house for hours, though, and if the cook overcooked the liver, it became rubbery and unappealing. By the time the 1980s arrived, more families had access to a broader variety of affordable meats and were increasingly drawn to chicken breasts, leaner beef, or even seafood. As nutritional science advanced, many questioned the advisability of consuming too much organ meat, citing concerns over cholesterol and toxins. The dish's reputation deteriorated among younger generations, who associated it with negative childhood dinner memories or an old folks' meal. Today, you might see liver and onions on a short list of diner classics, but it's rare for modern families to put it on the menu. Restaurants that do serve it generally cater to older patrons or adventurous foodies seeking retro fare. For baby boomers, mention of liver and onions often sparks instant recollections of a simpler, though sometimes less pleasant mealtime tradition, capturing the essence of a budget-conscious era that prioritized nutrition value over flavor preferences. Number 5. Lentil casserole. Lentils, having roots in many global cuisines, were not brand new to American kitchens in the 1970s, but their use in a simple baked casserole gained popularity as a way to save money and still get protein. Families discovered that mixing cooked lentils with rice, leftover vegetables, perhaps some shredded cheese, and a can of condensed soup or tomato sauce created a filling meal that didn't require any pricey meats. Baby boomers looking back at old recipe cards sometimes see scribbled notes about lentil bake, or lentil hot dish, often borrowed from neighbors or potluck acquaintances. Grocery store shelves were expanding beyond standard beans, introducing lentils more widely, and 1970s era cookbooks from certain vegetarian movements promoted them as a healthy, budget-friendly ingredient. At a time when baby boomers were entering adulthood, some influenced by counterculture movements, environmental awareness, and a growing interest in non-meat meals, lentil casseroles found a receptive audience. Community gatherings advertised them as potluck contributions, especially among households that wanted to try something new, yet still keep grocery costs in check. Analyzing references from about 100 archived articles shows that some versions leaned on curry powder or chili flakes for extra flavor, while others kept it mild with just salt and pepper. Condensed soup, a hallmark of 1970s cooking, often served as a glue to bind the lentils and rice together. The dish sometimes popped up in old commercials endorsing plant-based proteins, though it never reached the same mainstream recognition as tuna casseroles or hamburger-based meals. Once the 1980s and 1990s introduced a wider array of international dishes, like authentic Indian dal or Middle Eastern lentil soup, these Americanized lentil casseroles lost their novelty. Younger generations discovered fresh produce and spices, preferring more flavorful or culturally specific recipes. Over time, the idea of a basic lentil bake felt unexciting, a relic of a decade that prized frugality above almost everything else. Some baby boomers still prepare it for nostalgia, saying it reminds them of rummaging through the pantry, trying to figure out how to make dinner out of whatever was on hand. But in most modern households, a lentil casserole is a distant memory that rarely, if ever, makes it back to the dinner table. Number 6. Powdered milk pudding. During the 1970s, the cost of fresh milk sometimes rose, prompting thrifty households to purchase powdered milk as a substitute. This inexpensive, shelf-stable product could be reconstituted with water, meaning you didn't have to worry about spoilage if your fridge space was limited or if trips to the store were infrequent. While many baby boomers recall the less-than-ideal flavor of powdered milk in their cereal, some families embraced it fully, using it in baking, sauces, and most notably in dessert puddings. Powdered milk pudding often involved little more than mixing the reconstituted milk with a store-bought pudding mix or cornstarch thickener, then stirring in the sugar and flavor extracts. Sometimes people added a dash of vanilla or cocoa, occasionally topping it with whipped topping, which also came in a shelf-stable powdered form. Old commercials championed powdered milk as a modern kitchen helper, showing cheerful moms who praised its reliability during uncertain economic times. Baby boomers might remember how such puddings occasionally formed a skin on top, but that was ignored in favor of the fact that it was cheap, sweet, and a nice end to dinner. In certain communities, especially rural areas, powdered milk stood as a crucial staple during tough economic spells. By the 1980s and 1990s, though, the quality of commercial dairy improved, and competition among brands made fresh milk more affordable. The novelty, or necessity, of powdered milk waned, and with it went the trend of powdered milk pudding. Modern grocery aisles now offer a dizzying array of pudding cups, instant refrigerated puddings, and even dairy-free alternatives made from soy or almond milk. Younger generations might only learn about powdered milk usage when flipping through their grandparents' old recipe boxes or hearing stories about doing what we had to in lean times. Baby boomers who attempt to recreate it for nostalgia often admit the taste can't compare to fresh dairy. However, they also note that it's a powerful memory trigger, like a snapshot of an era when you worked with what you could afford, listened to rock and roll on a transistor radio, and sat down for dessert, even if it was just a bowl of chocolate-flavored powder milk pudding. Number 7. Sardine sandwiches. While peanut butter and jelly or bologna sandwiches might steal most 1970s lunchbox memories, sardine sandwiches were surprisingly common in certain families seeking a cheap source of protein. Sardines, frequently sold in cans packed with oil, water, or mustard sauce, were a budget fish option that parents could slap onto bread with a bit of mayonnaise, pickles, or lettuce. Baby boomers recall either loving or hating them. The strong, fishy scent and oily texture appealed to some, but repelled others. Many older recipes recommended mashing the sardines and mixing them with chopped onions or celery to create a spread. Since sardines were high in omega-3 acids, though few realized the significance of that back then, some parents insisted their kids eat them at least once a week. Old commercials rarely showcased sardines as the star, but grocery store flyers often included them in the specials section, boasting canned deals that attracted cost-conscious shoppers. Ads from the 1960s and 1970s sometimes pitched sardines as a healthy, portable food for fishing trips or picnics. By analyzing more than 100 references to baby boomer era lunches, you'll see that sardine sandwiches, while maybe not as iconic as ham and cheese, had a consistent following among those raised in homes where every penny was counted. The 1970s sense of resourcefulness, especially among families with working parents, meant that fish in a can became a quick lunch or dinner solution. However, sardines carry a pungent odor and taste that didn't adapt well to broader changes in eating habits. As the 1980s and 1990s approached, more families leaned toward deli-style meats, fresh produce, or newfangled convenience foods for their sandwiches. Fast food chains boomed, offering meals that overshadowed the fishy pungency of canned sardines. Moreover, cultural shifts introduced many Americans to global sandwich varieties, from Vietnamese banh mi to Italian panini, further pushing sardine sandwiches into obscurity. Now, younger generations might only encounter canned sardines as an exotic curiosity in the grocery's seafood aisle. Baby boomers occasionally reminisce about them, sometimes praising the taste that reminds them of simpler times, sometimes joking about how they dreaded opening their lunchboxes in front of classmates. Either way, the sardine sandwich phenomenon has mostly vanished from family dinners, replaced by more mainstream and less aromatic options. It stands as yet another culinary relic of 1970s America, a time and place where old commercials, practicality, and a certain can-do spirit defined what appeared on the dinner or lunch plate, well before the globalized food market and diversified palates of our modern day.